For nearly 40 years, Axl Rose has been the iconic leader of Guns N' Roses, a career marked by both tremendous success and intense personal battles. But now, in a shocking interview, Duff McKagan has broken his silence about Axl, revealing the tensions that existed within the band. McKagan spoke candidly about Axl's erratic behavior, how it strained the band, and how it affected them emotionally. But what exactly did he say? Join us for shocking details about legendary leader and musician Axl. In the early days of Guns N' Roses, the band's lineup was a perfect mix of raw talent and fierce energy, with Duff McKagan on bass, Axl Rose at the helm, and a collection of skilled musicians ready to take the world by storm. Duff and Axl formed a close bond early on, both personally and professionally, with their friendship becoming the backbone of the band's success. They shared a deep respect for each other's talents and vision, with Duff supporting Axl's bold ideas and Axl valuing Duff's grounded presence. Together, they navigated the highs and lows of their career, from the excitement of their breakthrough album Appetite for Destruction to the chaos of their relentless touring schedule. For a while, everything seemed to be going perfectly. Their chemistry on and off stage made Guns N' Roses one of the most iconic bands in rock history. But, as with many great partnerships, things began to change. Tensions grew, especially as personal issues and differences in vision started to surface. Axl's increasingly erratic behavior and shifting priorities put a strain on his relationship with Duff, and cracks began to form within the band. What was once a strong foundation of mutual trust and respect started to crumble. In a recent statement, Duff opened up about the tension with Axl, revealing the deep rifts that ultimately drove a wedge between them. While their friendship and musical collaboration had once been rock solid, the growing animosity became undeniable. It was a bitter end to a relationship that had once seemed unbreakable. The shift in Axl Rose's behavior took Duff McKagan completely by surprise. For years, Axl had been the creative force behind Guns N' Roses, and Duff had always admired his friend's brilliance and passion. Their bond, forged through the early days of struggling together, was unbreakable. Or at least, that's what Duff believed. They had been through so much together. Endless rehearsals, sleepless nights on tour buses, and the highs and lows of becoming one of the most famous rock bands in the world. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. At first, it wasn't noticeable. It was little things. Axl becoming more withdrawn, spending more time in his own world, pulling away from the camaraderie that had once defined the band. But these things were easy to overlook in the whirlwind of life on the road. Everyone was tired. Everyone had their moments of needing space. Axl had always been the more enigmatic one, the wild card in the group. His intense personality had always been a defining factor, but it had never been something that caused real issues, at least not in the way that Duff would soon realize. As the band continued to tour and work on new music, Axl's behavior became harder to ignore. There were moments when he would snap at the band for the smallest things, moments when he would disappear for hours without any explanation, and moments when his temper would flare up out of nowhere. It was nothing extreme at first, but it was noticeable, and it was beginning to wear on Duff. It wasn't just the band's internal dynamics that were changing. It was Axl himself. There was a coldness to him that hadn't been there before. He was more distant, more moody, more unpredictable. One of the first big signs came during a rehearsal in late 1991. It had been a long day of trying to fine-tune some of the songs for the band's upcoming album. Axl had always been a perfectionist, pushing everyone to work harder, to be better. But this time, something was different. He was restless, pacing around the studio, barely acknowledging anyone. He'd snap at the slightest mistake, and then, when things weren't going the way he wanted, he would just walk out of the room without a word, leaving everyone to wonder what was going on. Duff could feel the tension mounting in the air. It wasn't just frustration with the music. It was something deeper. Then, one day, Axl made a decision that would be the catalyst for everything that followed. He made it clear that he wasn't going to show up for a scheduled performance. The band was set to play a major show, one that would be broadcast live, and Axl, without any prior warning, decided he wasn't going to perform. No explanation, no reason given, just silence. The other members of the band were left scrambling, trying to figure out how they were going to proceed without their lead singer. Axl's absence sent shockwaves through the group. It wasn't the first time Axl had pulled out of a performance, but this was different. There was no explanation, no apology. It was as if he had just checked out. For Duff, this moment was when things started to feel less like a partnership and more like a one-man show. He had been through thick and thin with Axl, and he had always supported him, even when Axl's behavior was erratic. But this time, there was a sense of betrayal that Duff couldn't shake. Axl's sudden shift wasn't just a personal issue, it was affecting the band, the music, and their future. It felt like Axl had distanced himself not just physically, but emotionally. And for the first time, Duff wasn't sure what was going on in Axl's mind. Was he burning out? Was he tired of the fame? Was something else going on that no one knew about? The tension only grew after that. Axl's behavior became more erratic. He would sometimes show up late to rehearsals, often unprepared and distracted, not fully engaged in the process. When he did speak, it was often in short, cutting remarks that left the rest of the band members reeling. He seemed to be picking fights with everyone, but it wasn't the same playful back and forth that had once defined their dynamic. This was different. This was personal. There were moments when Axl's comments were sharp enough to sting, and it felt as though he was intentionally isolating himself from the band. But it wasn't just his behavior that was changing. It was the way he started communicating, or rather, the way he stopped. Axl, once so full of energy and ideas, became increasingly silent. He would disappear into his own world, spending more time alone in his dressing room or backstage, not engaging with the rest of the band. His mood seemed to swing wildly, from moments of intense anger to complete indifference. It was as if Axl had built an invisible wall around himself, and no one could break through. At first, Duff tried to reach out. He'd pull Axl aside, ask him what was going on, offer a sympathetic ear. But Axl wouldn't engage. He'd brush it off or change the subject, never letting anyone in. The more this happened, the more isolated Axl became. He stopped talking to Duff, stopped sharing his thoughts, stopped interacting with the band as a whole. It was as though the Axl everyone had once known, the Axl who was passionate about the music, who cared deeply about his bandmates, had disappeared. And in his place was someone who was distant, angry, and unpredictable. The tension came to a head during a major concert in 1992. It was meant to be one of the biggest shows of their career, with thousands of fans waiting to see them perform. The energy was electric, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But as the band was about to hit the stage, Axl pulled the plug. He refused to go on. There were no health issues, no personal emergencies, just a decision to cancel the show without any explanation. The crowd was left in disbelief, and the rest of the band was left scrambling to cover for him. The event marked the breaking point. The fans were furious, and the tension within the band was palpable. That night, Duff stood backstage, watching as Axl stormed off in a fit of anger. It wasn't the first time this kind of thing had happened, but it was the first time that Duff truly realized something had changed in their friendship. What had once been a brotherly bond, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, now felt strained and broken. There was a heaviness in the air that Duff couldn't ignore. The Axl he had known, the Axl he had supported and admired, was no longer there. And for the first time, Duff began to wonder if their friendship could ever be repaired. In the days that followed, the silence between the two grew. The band continued to perform, but the magic was gone. There were no more late-night conversations about the future, no more joking around backstage, no more moments of camaraderie. What had once been a collective effort was now becoming a solo mission for Axl. And as much as Duff wanted to help his friend, he couldn't reach him anymore. The Axl Rose he had once known and respected had disappeared, replaced by someone who was unpredictable, volatile, and distant. It was a painful realization for Duff, but it was one he couldn't deny. Their friendship, once unbreakable, was now hanging by a thread, and no one knew what would happen next. The shocking shift in Axl's behavior was more than just a personal change. It was a tipping point for the entire band. It marked the beginning of the unraveling of Guns N' Roses, the start of a period of uncertainty and tension that would lead to one of the most tumultuous chapters in rock history. For Duff, it was the beginning of the end of a friendship that had once meant everything. And as Axl's actions grew more unpredictable, it became clear that the relationship they had built over the years would never be the same again. The incident that truly set everything in motion between Duff McKagan and Axl Rose is still remembered as the moment that changed everything for Guns N' Roses. It was not an overnight shift, but rather a slow burn that finally erupted into something undeniable, something that couldn't be ignored. It was a moment that marked the beginning of the end for the tight-knit friendship that had once defined the band's identity. What seemed like an isolated incident soon snowballed into a full-blown fracture, one that would affect the entire band and ultimately change the course of their future. The band had been riding high on success. They were touring the world, headlining some of the biggest arenas and playing to packed stadiums. Guns N' Roses was on top of the world, and for a while it felt like nothing could stand in their way. Axl, as the frontman, was still driving the ship, leading the charge with his intense energy and commitment to the band's creative direction. But behind the scenes, things were starting to unravel. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for months had finally reached a boiling point. It all came to a head during a massive concert in 1992, one of the most anticipated events of their entire tour. The venue was packed, the audience electric with anticipation. Guns N' Roses was about to take the stage, ready to deliver yet another performance that would solidify their place in rock history. But instead of stepping out on stage to the roaring applause, Axl Rose suddenly disappeared from sight. The band waited, confused, and when it became clear that Axl wasn't coming back anytime soon, the tension grew palpable. The rest of the band, already uneasy with Axl's increasingly erratic behavior, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to deal with an audience that was left waiting. The minutes stretched on. Then, suddenly, without warning, Axl made an appearance. But not in the way anyone had expected. He walked onto the stage clearly agitated and addressed the crowd in a way that shocked everyone. He was frustrated, almost angry. He complained about something trivial, about his position on stage, about the lights, about anything and everything. The crowd, who had been eagerly waiting for the show, started to grow restless. They had been waiting for so long, and now they were faced with an Axl who was visibly irritated. Duff, who had always been one to support his friend, couldn't understand what was happening. Axl had always been intense, but this was different. He had always been someone who could channel his emotions into his music, but this time it was as if Axl was letting everything spill out in front of an audience, and not in the way that had made Guns N' Roses so magnetic. There was no creative outburst, no powerful performance. It was just raw, uncontrolled frustration. The moment became a turning point. As the tension between Axl and the rest of the band reached a peak, the audience's energy shifted from excitement to confusion. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know why Axl was so upset, or why the performance had come to a grinding halt. It was a situation that no one saw coming, and certainly not the fans who had paid to see the band play. The show was eventually canceled, and the band had to deal with the aftermath of an angry crowd and an even angrier management team. For Duff, it was a hard pill to swallow. This wasn't the Axl he had known for years, the Axl who had been focused, intense, and dedicated to the music. This was a version of Axl who seemed to be spiraling, lashing out at everything and everyone around him. It wasn't the first time Axl had shown signs of unpredictability, but this was the first time it had affected the entire band in such a public way. The tension that had been building between Axl and the rest of the band now had a face, and it was unmistakable. Backstage, Duff tried to speak with Axl, but the conversation went nowhere. Axl was defensive, angry, and unwilling to engage in any meaningful dialogue. It was clear that the issues between them weren't just about the show, they ran much deeper than that. There was something more going on in Axl's mind, something that Duff couldn't grasp. It felt like a wall had gone up between them, one that no amount of talking could break down. For the first time in their friendship, Duff began to feel a sense of distance from Axl that was hard to ignore. The next few days were filled with tension. Axl's behavior became more erratic, and the band's dynamic started to shift. The group, once a tight-knit unit that worked together seamlessly, was now filled with confusion and frustration. Duff, along with the other band members, began to question what had happened to their frontman. Why had he changed? Why was he acting this way? The bandmates tried to rally around Axl, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. It felt like their efforts to understand him were being rejected, and that Axl was pushing them further away with every passing day. In the aftermath of the incident, the media began to pick up on the growing rift within the band. Rumors swirled about Axl's behavior, about his struggles with fame, and about his growing isolation from the rest of the group. Fans who had once worshipped Axl's every move now started to question him. What had caused the shift? Was it the pressure of fame? Was it personal struggles? No one knew for sure, but what was clear was that something had changed in Axl, and it wasn't just affecting the band, it was affecting their music, their performances, and their entire dynamic. For Duff, the whole situation was frustrating. He had always been the grounding force in the band, the one who helped keep everything together when things got chaotic. But now it seemed like he was losing touch with Axl, the one person he had always leaned on for support. The band's chemistry was slipping away, and Duff couldn't help but feel that Axl was slipping away with it. It was a painful realization, one that he hadn't been ready for. Axl, once the driving force of Guns N' Roses, was now becoming a shadow of the person he had been. And it was clear that their once unbreakable friendship was being tested in ways that neither of them had anticipated. The fallout from that incident would be felt for years to come. The relationship between Axl and Duff, once so strong, had begun to crumble, and it was hard to see how they could come back from it. The rift between them grew wider, and the band's future became uncertain. What had once been a group of friends united by their love of music was now a group of individuals struggling to make sense of their fractured dynamic. The incident had set everything in motion, and there was no turning back. Guns N' Roses, as they had once known it, was never going to be the same again. In the aftermath of the incident that shocked both the band and the fans, things between Axl Rose and the rest of the Guns N' Roses crew began to deteriorate rapidly. The once unbreakable bond that held the band together was now on the verge of snapping. What had started as a few small cracks in the foundation of their relationship had now turned into massive chasms, impossible to ignore. For Duff McKagan, who had once felt like Axl was not just a bandmate but a close friend, the growing distance between them was something he had never expected. In the days following the controversial concert that ended abruptly with Axl's unexplained disappearance, the tension among the band members was palpable. While the world was left to wonder what had caused Axl's breakdown, the rest of the band was left to pick up the pieces. But no one was really sure what to say or do next. Axl was unreachable. He had become more withdrawn than ever, shutting himself off from the group. At first there was an attempt to reach out. Duff, along with the others, tried to get in touch with Axl, hoping to understand what was going on. But every effort to engage him was met with silence. He was distant, not only from the band, but from everyone around him. It was a silence that spoke volumes. For a long time, Duff had admired Axl's energy, his intensity, and his drive. But now, it felt as though those very qualities had turned against him. Axl was no longer the passionate, fiery frontman who had been the driving force of Guns N' Roses. He was someone else entirely. Someone whose actions were unpredictable, whose words were often sharp and cutting, and who seemed intent on pushing everyone away. The man who had once been at the center of the band's creative force now seemed like a stranger to Duff and to the rest of the group. At first, the band tried to power through, continuing with rehearsals and preparing for upcoming gigs, but the mood was different. The energy in the room was off. No one could deny it. Axl's absence, both physically and emotionally, cast a shadow over everything they did. The rehearsals that once were filled with excitement and creativity now felt like a chore. Duff couldn't help but notice how the band was functioning without their frontman, and it wasn't good. They were going through the motions, but it wasn't the same. The chemistry that had once existed between them seemed to be fading, and they were struggling to hold it together. Duff, in particular, found himself caught in a difficult position. He had been Axl's ally, his confidant, and his friend for years. He had stood by Axl through thick and thin, through the highs and the lows. But now, he was questioning everything. The silence between them felt like a growing rift, one that he didn't know how to fix. He had always been the stabilizing force in the band, the one who helped keep everything grounded. But this time, it felt like he was losing control of the situation, and he didn't know how to get it back. Axl's behavior was erratic, and it wasn't just the band that felt the shift. The crew, the managers, and even the fans began to notice the change. The once energetic and unpredictable Axl was now turning inward, becoming more and more reclusive. He was spending long hours in his dressing room, away from the band, avoiding conversations and shutting out the world. This was not the Axl that Duff had known. This was someone who seemed lost, someone who didn't want to be found. The frustration was building, and Duff knew that it wasn't just about the music anymore. Something deeper was happening. But what? The band began to feel the pressure. They were walking on eggshells around Axl, unsure of how he would react to anything. One wrong word, one wrong move, and everything could explode. It was an unbearable atmosphere. The group that had once been united by their shared passion for music and their close friendship was now splintering. There were no more late-night talks, no more joking around between band members. Everyone kept their distance, unsure of what to say or do next. Duff tried to keep a sense of normalcy within the band. He would joke around, try to lighten the mood, but it wasn't working. Axl was completely absent, and the silence between them was deafening. Duff could feel the weight of the distance, and it was wearing on him. The music was no longer the primary focus. It was the growing divide within the band that consumed everyone's attention. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, with no safety net below.